Berserk Boy is a great indie game, and by the end of this video, you'll probably agree with that statement. Despite that, you're not going to play it. Let me explain why. So to understand this game, we need to start with its general structure. Now, let's be clear, I do not like backtracking in games. There are exceptions, of course, but generally speaking, it's almost never something I want to do. However, quite miraculously, Berserk Boy was able to make the task of backtracking a genuinely enjoyable experience. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it changed the way I view backtracking, and now I'm just itching at the opportunity to do it again in more games, because that would be a lie. But the way it's handled here is actually surprisingly clever and well thought out. There are three main collectibles in Berserk Boy: Lost Resistance members, emblems, and orbs. I'm sure they have an actual name, but oh, I guess they're literally just called orbs. Okay, cool. Starting with the first one, Lost Resistance members can be found throughout the stages. Sometimes they're just standing around, but oftentimes they're hidden away in secret rooms behind small platforming gauntlets. Emblems, on the other hand, are basically always guarded by either platforming or a room with a group of enemies in it. Both of these collectibles together are used to unlock bonus EX stages that effectively act as condensed, focused versions of their normal counterparts. They're quick challenges that take the normal stages, refine them down to their most fundamental forms, and create these 90-second obstacle courses of pure distilled speed, precision, and flow. I made an entire video about how good this feeling was in older games like Mega Man Zero, and it's all over the place here. Finally, the most common collectible, the blue orbs, can be found everywhere, but that doesn't mean they're not important. You use these orbs for upgrades. You can increase your max health, get some more energy for your specials, or even upgrade most of your attacks. What makes these so great is that when you stumble into a room of 100 of these things, you technically just got an upgrade, it just hasn't taken form yet. So where there would have been something like a health booster or a new weapon here, there are instead these orbs that allow you to mold that upgrade into whatever you want it to be. Now that we understand these things that you collect and their rewards, we can look at why the backtracking is so important and how they choose to handle it in this game. Very frequently, you'll reach a secret that you have no way of accessing. Maybe there's a door with a symbol on it or a platform you can't interact with. If you've played a video game before, this concept probably isn't that crazy to you. Where Berserk Boy actually takes this idea a step further is with what I call resistance gates. These are special doors that won't open until you've rescued a certain percentage of resistance members from the stage. This is usually the part where I'd roll my eyes like they're dice in a casino. Why did I write that? I'd get annoyed, drop the game, and play basically anything else. The devs had a feeling this would happen though, and almost as if they were thinking about people like me who really don't like backtracking, they implemented two systems. First, let's go over the obvious one. You don't need to collect all of this stuff to beat the game. Granted, you do need to collect some of it to see the credits, but it's such a small number that you can mostly do it in the background without much thought. With the exception of that, everything here is optional. You don't need to complete EX stages, you don't need to get every upgrade, and the orbs that you get throughout a normal playthrough will be more than enough to upgrade the essentials like your health and energy. The second and significantly more important thing that makes backtracking mostly a breeze is the teleporter system. There are 4 checkpoints in every stage, and upon reaching each one, you can open up the menu, select the checkpoint you'd like to return to, and head back. It's about as easy as it gets. Well, granted, pressing the subscribe button is probably a lot easier since you don't even need to reach a checkpoint to do it, but I digress. This teleporter system not only makes backtracking significantly more smooth, as you don't have to run back through the entire stage just because you reached the resistance quota, but it also makes searching for secrets substantially more simple as well. Now, this system could be improved a bit by automatically unlocking all the teleporters the moment you complete a stage, as that way you would no longer have to complete the entire stage when returning with a new upgrade, but it's not a huge deal. As great as this is though, it's all just quality of life at the end of the day. What really makes Berserk Boy stand out are the designs of the stages and the suit system, which together are able to create something in 30 minutes that most games struggle to do in over a dozen hours. So I'm gonna assume you have eyes and say that you can probably tell this game is a platformer. In most platformers, gravity is an extremely fundamental part of the experience. You jump, then fall back down. It's extremely simple and you've done it tens of thousands of times, but here's a question. If you could ignore that gravity, what would that do to the game? Imagine if in World 3 Mario just got wings and was able to fly around indefinitely. That'd totally break the game, right? I mean, sure, it'd be fun for a little bit, but that type of upgrade is just too powerful for a platformer. Or is it? The main mechanic of Berserk Boy are these suits that you can use to totally change how you play the game. Each one has its own attributes, strengths, and weaknesses. Let's look at 2 individually to see this idea in practice. The lightning suit is all about speed and precision. You get 3 main attacks: a dash that lets you bounce off of enemies, a bolt of lightning that you can use to launch a homing projectile at enemies that you dashed into, and a slam that does a fair bit more damage than your other attacks. This slam can only be used in the air, goes straight down, and does not allow you to move once you've initiated it. This leads to a playstyle where you're constantly constantly bouncing between enemies, flying through the air, and slamming on the ground at the perfect moment to deal the most damage. On the other hand, we've got the fire suit. This comes with a ground combo with a few high damage hits, an uppercut in the air for a bit more vertical reach, a drill that can go down at only these angles, and the ability to hide in the ground, making you temporarily invulnerable until you pop out with a surprisingly powerful attack. The focus here is damage. Run in, overwhelm the enemy with your combos, hide in the ground to dodge, and jump out to go back on the offensive. The fire suit is great at dealing with these shield enemies since it hits harder than lightning does and can use that ground attack to simply bypass the shield altogether. However, it's not as good at dealing with enemies that are further away or higher up since it lacks the speed and precision of lightning. All 5 suits are like this, albeit with varying degrees of complexity. They all excel at something, and there's really no one suit that's far and away better than the rest. This doesn't apply to just combat either. Each stage is filled with these suit-specific obstacles that you can't overcome without using the suit that they're designed around. These aren't as simple as a lock and key system where you use one ability from one suit to unlock a door. They instead focus on the attributes of that suit and design obstacles around them. So remember that dash attack that lightning has? Well, it can be used for platforming too. There will often be these strings of enemies above an enormous chasm that you'll have to chain together dash attacks to get past. Sometimes you'll be on a moving platform with spikes that are too low to avoid, and you'll have to use the fire suit to hide in the ground for a bit. Now this is where that whole flying Mario thing from earlier comes in. This is the wind suit, and with it you gain the ability to fly. This should break the game, I expected it to, but the way the stages are designed prevents that from happening. While these strings of enemies can be bypassed using the wind suit, it's far from efficient as you'll have to slowly and carefully navigate your way around all the obstacles that were designed for the lightning suit. Furthermore, it won't work for long as you'll likely run into one of these lightning gates. This is an obstacle that will only respond to the lightning dash. These work perfectly in these strings of enemies since you'll just chain your dashes from one obstacle to the next. You'll hardly even notice them. However, if you're trying to just ignore everything and fly through, these will stop you in your tracks. The spikes are the same. While yes, it's technically possible to fly at just the right height to go under the spikes, it's really not practical at all. Like with the lightning dash, it'd be significantly more efficient and quite frankly easier to just use the fire suit and drill into the ground. All of this boils down to one idea. You can use the windsuit's flight ability to ignore a lot of the obstacles in your way, but if it's actively making the game more difficult and slowing you down in the process, did it actually break the game? I'm not sure. Does something that allows you to ignore the game's mechanics but actively make the game slower and more difficult count as breaking the game to you? Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Anyway, that aside, the stage designs and the suits do allow for something that's a bit harder to put into words. You know that feeling you get at the end of a game, not just platformers, but any game really, when you're using all of the mechanics to counter everything the game is throwing at you, actively demonstrating your mastery over all the game's systems and moving through in this almost flow state where you know exactly what to do and when? I absolutely love that feeling, and believe it or not, Berserk Boy is actually able to capture it as early as the 4th stage in the game. Remember how each suit has different mechanics when it comes to platforming? Well, the game gradually introduces you to these mechanics after you unlock them in a safe and controlled environment. The moment it's certain you understand them, it throws you right back into the fire and asks you to demonstrate your mastery of everything you've learned so far at the same time. There will be these sequences where you're asked to start in lightning by dashing through a chain of enemies, then instantly switch to fire to move a platform, then back to lightning to get a gate out of the way, then back to fire to drill through some dirt, and so on. These sections feel so good to run through because switching feels so deliberate and purposeful. You're actively switching between these two forms as the game demands it, and you're constantly changing how you play at the drop of a hat. First you're jumping on platforms, next you're dashing through lanterns, now you're flying through the air. It feels so varied and exciting, and it's a large reason why platforming never really felt dull despite a lot of the same hazards existing through the entire game. The lightning gates, for example, are here from the very start all the way to the end, but it's how you interact with these hazards along with your ability to recognize and respond to them at a moment's notice that makes them feel so rewarding. The suits aren't gimmicks that you use once and then forget about. They're additional tools added to your arsenal with their own specific qualities that you'll actively and intentionally take advantage of to perfectly counter every challenge the game throws at you. This game is great. I mean, truly, I loved nearly every second of it, but it's just not good enough. There's this great quote from an NBA player named Brian Scalabrine. For some context, next to players you've heard of like LeBron James, this guy is not very good. He's a bench warmer, barely plays in any actual games, and is more likely to be the guy to get you a water bottle than a championship. The quote from him goes, "I am closer to LeBron than you are to me." Even the worst NBA player is insanely good at basketball, better than you or me or probably anyone you know will ever be. Unfortunately, because they play against the best players of all time, they may look mediocre or even bad. The developer of Berserk Boy could go on an interview tomorrow and say Berserk Boy is closer to Hollow Knight than any game you can make will be to Berserk Boy, and he'd probably be right. This is a very, very good video game. I'm not going to argue it's better than Hollow Knight because we both know it's not, but it's still undeniably an outstanding piece of work, and Berserk Boy isn't special in that it's the only great indie game with less than 300 reviews on Steam. No, quite the opposite. It's probably one of thousands of games that will go unknown and unplayed because they just aren't good enough. Not because they're bad by any means, but because they don't stand out in a sea of other outstanding games. So because Berserk Boy is only substantially better than most indie games, because it's only great instead of greatest of all time, most of you probably won't play it. And honestly, I think that's okay. Sure, this game won't win Game of the Year, it won't fundamentally change how we look at the medium, but I liked it a lot. And if just one person watching this video does too, I think I did my job.